as you know, we were supposed to have both Tracy interviewing and talking with David Kinnaman here for the next 90 minutes in terms of this last class that we're doing with Andy Crouch for the first 3 sessions. And now we are finishing up with Dave Kinnaman, supposedly, but you're sitting there while Dave isn't on. We have this guy named Mark Matlock from Barna. Trust me, this guy is amazing. And so for all of you guys who don't know, I mean, seriously, Dave actually, his wife Jill passed away from brain cancer maybe about right before the Thanksgiving holidays. And so I knew Jill personally because we were diagnosed with cancer at the same time. I had cancer in my sinus. She was diagnosed with cancer in her brain. And so she was just an encouragement to me in my own personal life. And she just really would just text to see how I'm doing, how I'm feeling. And so sadly, that cancer came back very aggressively and she passed right before. And so David just emailed and last week and says, hey, I just can't do it. Emotionally, I'm just not there. Mentally, I'm just not there. And so would it be possible for Mark to really be able to take his place? So Mark, thank you very much for stepping in. You are, if not just as good of a replacement for Dave as I could think of. And Mark and I had a conversation last night for an event that he did for me for another organization I work with. And so he was phenomenal as well too. And so, hey, let me, for those who may not know who I am, my name is Tommy Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Growth Center for Church and Mission. And so every single month, we try to do a big event or virtual event like this. But this event happens to fall in the micro course that we do under the Growth Center. And so Andy Crouch spoke for 3 weeks. And then from that point on, Dave and now Mark is our final speaker, and it's this whole idea of Christian and culture. Specifically, we're going to look at evangelism in this changing culture. And for those who are not familiar with the Growth Center, we've been around for probably in the last 6-7 months, an initiative under Northern Seminary. How do we continue to provide theological training, applicable training, not only in the U.S., but around the world to really be for pastors, ministry, marketplace leaders, all of that. And we've created this ecosystem called the Entrepreneurial Ministry Leader Ecosystem because the role of the pastor has changed. And many of us who are, whether it's in full-time ministry or marketplace leaders who want to go into ministry or pastors who are more entrepreneurial in spirit, it looks different, whether it's in different parts of the US or in Asia or in Africa. And so a lot of times for more information on the Growth Center, go to thegrowthcenter.com. With that said, let me introduce Mark and then introduce Tracy, and then we'll get them started as well too. Just so you know, Mark works part-time with the Barna Group, doing a lot of their speaking, teaching, as well as research. Before that, he was your executive director of youth specialties for many years, founder of Wisdom Works LLC. He is also an advisor to organizations and consultant to companies such as the C Company, Brotherhood Mutual, Movement Day, Better Man, and is on the board of the American Bible Society. He is author of more than 20 books, and in 2019 co-authored the book Faith for Exiles with David Kinnaman. And Tracy is someone who I just literally met maybe about the last couple months ago, and we've gotten a chance to work together. She's the interim. Tracy, what's your title here at Northern?
Yeah, I'm the interim director of worship and preaching.
Yeah. And more so, a lot of times she spends a lot of time at Christ Church of Oak Brook as one of their teaching pastors. So I am just very encouraged by Tracy. And Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to come back in the last 5 minutes to wrap up our time together.
Awesome. Thank you, Tommy, and welcome everyone to this conversation. I am thrilled that we get to dive into the topic of Christian engagement with culture again. And for those of you who were with us with Andy Crouch over the past couple sessions, as you know, he is just such a brilliant mind around these matters. And I know Mark is as well. Mark, you might not even know this, but years ago, I followed your thinkings and your musings in YS. I spent lots of years in student ministry, so it's really exciting to get to engage with you on this. I know you know rising generations well, and you know the current makeup of so many generations. So we're very excited and blessed and grateful to get to share this time with you. I'm going to pray for us, and
Yeah,
then
it's always a little intimidating to follow Andy Crouch. I'll just say that. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've accomplished. Andy Crouch is like the man. So
I know,
yeah,
he's a
I know.
mastermind.
When Tommy told me, yeah, you're just coming off of 3 weeks with Andy Crouch, I'm like, wah, wah, you know, so anyway.
Yeah. So top that. You can top Andy. That's your task for today.
That's not going to happen.
I'm going to pray for us, though, just to kind of welcome the Spirit into this conversation. I'll give you guys a couple tiny little bits of information on how this format will work today. And then Mark, we're just going to go for it. So let me just pray for us to get started. Lord Jesus, we are grateful to be gathered today, God, and however it is that you gather your people, whether that's in person as it used to be or now in this new digital way, God, we're grateful. Grateful that we live at a time in history where this technology is available and that we are in places that have the resources that enable us to engage our minds and our hearts around your church and the culture you are crafting in this world. So God, may we be faithful stewards of this time, of the resources you've provided for us, Lord. May your Spirit guide us. May you move in and through and around us as we engage today in this important conversation. And may we be changed ministry and church leaders for the better, for your glory, for your kingdom, Lord, because we shared this space today. In the name of Jesus, everyone, wherever they are, said together, amen.
Amen.
Well, what I'd love to do today, we're primarily a question answer format today. So we've got Mark, with us, and my hope is that we can just kind of crack open his brilliant mind and just let him kind of wax eloquent on the things that he knows and is passionate about that God has put on his heart. And I have a whole slate of questions ready to go, but this is not my show or me asking questions. And so one of the great joys of a format like this in a small setting that we're in is that you all get to ask questions. And so Tommy's going to kind of moderate that chat for us. And if you've got questions you want to ask, please send them to him, and he'll kind of curate those and send them my way, and I'll do my best to not let my ADD kick in and lose my place, but I will definitely check those questions. So, Mark, one of the things that we've been able to do with Andy is talk about, obviously, the Christian engagement with culture. Mm-hmm. But one of the first things that we needed to do with Andy was understand what did he mean when he said culture.
Yeah.
Obviously in Christianity, we have so many different conversations around culture, whether it's something we're supposed to create or whether it's something we react against. And then, of course, there's different levels of culture. There's the dominant culture, there's subcultures, there's cultures in different contexts around the world. So when we say culture to you, and specifically Christian engagement with culture, mm-hmm. Can we just start out by asking you, how do you define culture? And how do you see Christians engaging with that culture? So
yeah, my actual undergraduate education was around intercultural studies. So I hold to more of a classic anthropological definition of culture, which would be the shared values, beliefs, stories, artifacts of a group of people. So we can be talking about American culture in a broad sense. We can talk about dominant culture as we break it down. We talk about minority cultures. We can talk about subcultures, but any group that you're defining, we talk about church culture, Christian culture. And anytime that we break that down, we're looking at what are those things that we share in terms of our values, our beliefs, our shared stories, artifacts that we use to do the work that we do. All of those things are, to me, what makes up our culture.
So, question then, to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah.
When you, in the role that you're in, and obviously you're this sort of purveyor of all this wonderful information that Barna has, when we talk about Christians and the church engaging culture, which expression of that culture do you see us engaging most, or do you find would be the dominant kind of piece of the conversation that we might be having
Yeah,
today?
when I hear about how does the church engage culture, I typically think of I think of it a little more broadly theologically, and that would just be that we're talking about the world, the world system of operating apart from God. So when Solomon talked about, I wanted to find out what was worthwhile under the sun, for me, that would be a part of what the world's culture is. What can I accomplish apart from God under the sunline? When James talks about there being two kinds of wisdom that comes from above and wisdom that comes from below, that wisdom that comes from below, that is that earthly wisdom. And it works. It has some qualities that actually can be efficacious, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the wisdom of God that we're supposed to be implementing in our lives. So to me, that's how I would define, if we were talking about church and culture, I would tend to think that most people are talking about the world and the world systems. We are obviously know in the Bible, the world was used in several different ways. It was used to talk about the actual cosmos. It was used to talk about people, for God so loved the world. He's talking about the people of the world. And then it's talked in a pejorative way, right? That we aren't a part of this world. So that tends to be how I would tend to talk about it most frequently or commonly among Christians.
Awesome. Well, and specifically for our setting today, I'm going to make a sweeping assumption here, but based on the names on the screen and the fact that there's sunlight in most of your windows, I think we're all in a North American context right now in the American church having this discussion, which interestingly wasn't true when we talked with Andy. We were sharing that space with ministry and church leaders from Nairobi, so it was a different dynamic around the cultural conversation. But for the sake of our time
and
today,
that is a big problem, because the United States tends to think pretty narrowly about culture. And when we talk about culture, a lot of times we're talking about media and we're talking about those types of things. And so it's, we're not even oftentimes talking about politics or whatever. We're usually talking about entertainment. So it is an important conversation to have. How are those terms defined? What do they mean? It's good.
Well, yeah, and that's what's so curious to me that I wanted to know if you wanted to speak to a little bit is, you have some of these beautiful beginnings of, let's just say the New Testament early church culture, right? The communities that came about, through the teachings of Jesus very early on, and Paul, and now fast forward, here we are, North American context, 2020, and we're at a space where I think a lot of the experience that ministry leaders and Christians have is sort of, they see culture as this thing oftentimes, and I'm not saying everybody here on this call does, but the church in general sees this thing that's outside the church that is happening somewhere, and our job is to react against it, or digest it, or tell our people which parts of it are okay for your ears or your reading or for you to take in. And it's curious to me how over the years, the church in the United States particularly has, I think, relinquished its job as creators of culture and become sort of these commentators on culture. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that. And is that a healthy posture, to be critiquing or commenting on culture instead of creating it? Like, I know it was like 6 questions at once there, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I love it. I'm great with that. So, one of the interesting things, if we look at the arc of Scripture, right, God is always calling people out, right? And even when God breathed life into Adam, he was calling him out and separating him from the rest of creation, giving him moral responsibility for his actions. And so, even that early into Genesis, we see this idea of God setting apart, right? And when he called Noah and Abraham to do it, to do their thing, there's this theme of setting apart that is throughout Scripture. And when David and my book that just came out, Faith for Exiles, is really exploring what faithfulness looks like in what David and I call digital Babylon. And this idea that especially in the United States, we've grown up with this idea that we are a Christian nation, that our culture embodies deeply Christian values. And for a lot of intents and purposes, why we may have overblown some of those statements, the culture in general did reflect a lot of our core values, whether people actually understood that or not. And so we would, as we were making disciples and raising people up in the Lord, there was this sense that our community and the world around us was actually supporting that journey, filling in some of the gaps, creating a cohesiveness. But what's happened, particularly through the internet age, is we've become aware of diversity in ways that we never have before. And so pluralism has exploded, not because we weren't diverse people before, but because our awareness and our frequency of contact and the depth of contact with diverse people went up immensely. And all of a sudden we found ourselves disoriented. So when we look at like the whole, make America great again type of a mantra in the United States that Donald Trump promoted, people went, oh, Donald Trump, he's a nationalist a lot. Well, that's going on all over the world. And it's not just happening in Western countries and civilizations, but India has a huge Hindu nationalist movement that's trying to preserve the culture of India in their nation. And they don't want Christianity or anybody else coming in and changing this thing that makes them uniquely who they feel they are as a country. I got into an interesting discussion on Twitter with some Hindu nationalists. We were talking, I was lamenting Compassion International having to leave India over some new regulations. And they were saying, hey, look, you Christians have all these countries. We Hindus have one, just let us, and ours is better. We've been around longer. You based yours off of our, all this stuff. But it was very interesting because I was sitting there going, I'm talking to I felt like I was talking to like the boomer generation that feels like America's changing radically and they don't want it to. And I was like going, wow, this is a really interesting phenomenon. And then you start seeing in Brexit and all these other things, places around the world where this identity crisis has happened because we're becoming aware of the narratives of diverse peoples. And we're having to deal with that in a way we've never had to deal with it. And so we're kind of still sorting that out, right? So but throughout all of this, narrative in Scripture, we've always been called called out. And so David and I were saying, we're now living in this digital Babylon. We're no longer in the United States, at least in this Jerusalem or the pseudo Jerusalem. We are now, and the Puritans kind of brought that narrative over, right? This idea that we were the light on the hill and that we were the new Jerusalem. Starting America and reviving our faith. Well, those roots still live inside of us because it's the shared stories, right, they're coming out. Well, now our stories are merging with other stories of people in America, Native American stories that's like, that's not the way we see it. And the stories of African Americans who have their roots and their history in slavery. And they're saying, hey, this isn't how we see it. So all these things are kind of now coming together and it's causing disorientation. It makes people kind of want to cling to what's familiar. And so I kind of liken it to like, it's like a dinosaur going down in a tar pit and it's like gasping for its last breath of air. But the reality is making disciples in our churches when we were more experiencing homogeneity, even though that may have been an illusion, is very different than raising disciples in a more pluralistic society. So books like the Corinthians are going to tell us a lot more about how to do life in this pluralistic culture because that's what their church was struggling with at that time. So to go back now to the New Testament, this idea of exileship, while David and I talked about digital Babylon, which puts it kind of in an Old Testament context, the reality is, the New Testament reality is that we were always called as Christians to be somewhere else. Our citizenship, therefore, is in heaven, right? So when we are made into new creations, we have an identity change that happens. We no longer conform to the patterns of this world, but we're transformed by the renewing of our mind. So we're going through this cultural transition as we're living out our faith and becoming sanctified. And that means that this idea of resident alienship, right? You are aliens, live your lives as aliens and strangers. You are ambassadors, therefore, and you represent Christ. All of these things, these metaphors that are used in the New Testament to describe the role of the believer in posture and relationship to culture is as outsiders. And I think that's what the church is struggling with in the United States right now is, how do we navigate this? Are we all in with culture, even if it's a more Christian-y kind of culture, or are we going to figure out how to truly live as that resident alien, as those ambassadors? What's interesting about those metaphors in the New Testament, in light of our recent political situation in the U.S., is that none of those positions get to vote. They are representative of a foreign authority, so they don't actually have a lot of political influence directly with the place that they reside. That authority comes from another place. And what they're there to do is to represent the values, the beliefs, the behaviors, the artifacts of the culture they're representing, which is our forever home, the kingdom of heaven, which none of us have actually ever been in. And Jesus encouraged us to live on earth as it is in heaven. So this is kind of I'm trying to answer all 6 of your questions. But it's important to understand this framework in terms of the way I see our posture toward culture. And I'm speaking a lot more for myself than I am on behalf of Barna on some of these things, because David and I haven't thoroughly vetted all of this. But so I just want to make that little disclaimer. But that's kind of how I'm seeing our current situation in the world. And the reality is, and my children, who I tried to raise as resident aliens, I tried to raise as foreign ambassadors, living in the world but not being of the world. What they have struggled with is finding a church that wants to live that way, that postures themselves as the body of Christ in that way. And that is a really interesting challenge in the present kind of culture war kind of environment or context that we find ourselves in.
That's awesome. That was a lot. I have so many questions.
That was a lot. I'm sorry.
I mean, that was a lot of good stuff. Not a lot bad, but I mean,
yeah.
Like I just was writing some notes here, and I really appreciate the angle on citizenship and that kingdom citizenship that we have, and because there is currently in the United States such a rampant stream of nationalism. I think we sometimes put our citizenship in heaven and our American passport in the same in the same space, and they were never meant to be that way. It is interesting though, and this is a kind of a question on that kind of citizenship and the different narratives and streams you were talking about. Even within, let's say we're all like, okay, yes, we all have our citizenship in heaven. Let's all say that in North America. Amen to that. However, the experiences are even so different within that. Yes. I have a good friend who leads an African-American congregation, and he was saying to me how frustrated, how happy he was that we were talking nationally about race in a renewed way, mm-hmm. but how frustrated he was that so many white evangelical pastors were saying, now we're talking about race, or let's talk about race, or the ache this year that this country has felt because, we're reckoning and talking about race. And he says, we've been talking about race since we landed our feet on this soil. He goes, the white church is finally talking about race, so yes. Even the nuances within these experiences, the narratives and the citizenship gets expressed in such different ways. So that was a long preamble to probably a question I don't have fully formed in my head yet, but is there
that is the challenge of white dominant culture in the US, right? And even at Barna, we've had to really start looking at how we're sampling things, because while our data reflects all populations in the United States, so all minority voices are heard in there, the dominant culture can sway the message so much that we're starting to oversample for minority aspects of the church, so that we're telling a more accurate distinction between those nuances. And that's been a relatively new thing that we've been uncovering at Barna over the last several years for our State of Youth Ministry project that we did. We paid a lot extra to oversample, because I said, I don't know that this idea of people falling away from the church is true in some of these other church expressions. And so it is getting harder to tell our story. And to be honest, that's one of the things that we're finding at Barna right now is that we're having a blurry experience of what's really going on, because we are starting to embrace a bigger picture of what God is doing and of God's people. And that blurriness creates a little bit of disorientation, right? We're feeling the effects of not being able to see clearly, or realizing that things that we thought were crystal clear in our focus are not, as we're hearing from other experiences and backgrounds.
Well, yeah, and along those lines, like, what then do we do as church and ministry leaders to begin to reorient people toward that sort of citizenship, that heaven, that kingdom citizenship? You know, we are colossally disoriented nationally in the U.S., and the church is disoriented, and people with deep commitments to Scripture and to the kingdom of God will land in dramatically different places on issues. And or I guess the question is even more than that: does the church itself shape a unified national culture? And by national, I don't mean an American culture, but should the church come together with a better expression of culture than the disjointed, fractionalism we have today? Or does every expression of church just shape itself locally? You know what I'm saying? Is there a global national brand of Christianity we should be chasing after to engage culture, or is it something different?
Well, I don't know if it's something we chase after so much as what is God doing, right? And at Barna, we really see the research that we're doing is just kind of revealing what is reality, what's going on, what's taking place. We recently did a global study for World Vision of Christian millennials in 25 different countries in all regions of the globe. What we found was really pretty interesting, and that was that global millennial Christians had more in common with each other in terms of their worldview and what they're experiencing in life than they did with the generation above them in their own, geographic culture, so to speak. Okay. And that was kind of an exciting thing to see, because it made me think, okay, what is God doing, right? Is God connecting a generation of the church that realizes that as the church, we are without a home on this earth, so to speak, right? That our citizenship isn't a kingdom that's far away. Is this generation understanding it? What I'm experiencing with so many of the young people that I've ministered to over their lives that are now in their 20s and 30s is they're saying, hey, I don't know what to do. The people that raised me to follow Jesus and to live for him every day are not the same people. They're actually saying that I'm apostate, or that I'm a heretic. And all I'm doing is trying to live the life that they raised me to live. And one of my former students wrote an open letter to families at Thanksgiving time. And he said, you're going to call us liberals, you're going to call us socialists, all these things. Please understand that maybe we are just trying to live out the Jesus that you raised us to live. And we're trying to figure out how what happened to you? Where are you at? And I thought it was a brilliant way of capturing what was going on, because that's what I'm seeing. And so I'm finding that that millennials, Generation Z, are growing up in a fundamentally different time, and that the time that they're growing up in is giving them a new imagination for the future, and a new imagination for how things could be, a different set of values, because they've had a unique life experience. Some people have said, the millennials are one of the unluckiest generations because there have been major economic and world crises that have taken place at most of their critical milestone events on the millennial journey. And out of that has come some really amazing creativity. And one of the things that older generations get frustrated by is they speak pejoratively toward millennials, and millennials speak pejoratively toward the older generation. So you have millennials saying, okay, boomer, and you have boomers saying, hey, you snowflakes, right? Notice that Generation X doesn't really get a lot of game in any of those conversations. And one of the reasons are we're a small generation. We haven't necessarily been big enough demographically from a population standpoint to kind of stake our claim in the cultural landscape. So what we're kind of acting at is, or our opportunity for Gen Xers is that we're like a bridge between the boomers and the millennials. And one of the things that I find myself helping boomers out with is understanding that millennials may be one of the first generations, because of the internet revolution, the digital revolution that took place during their early years of growing up, that they may be the first generation that actually has a skill and a wisdom that the older generations need in order to be resilient and think forward. And so while older generations are saying to younger generations, we need you to pay your dues, the younger generation is saying, no, we don't. We actually can take care of ourselves right now. We can actually move forward. In fact, Rod Penner's on this call, and Rod and I were talking one time about this, and he said, I think millennials are just doing what we all wish we could have done. We just weren't capable of doing. I remember that from a phone call that we had, Rod. And I think that's really true. We had to stay in our jobs because there either wasn't a good job market, but we didn't have the tools to be able to find a job easily. So it was a big deal to leave your job. Now it's not so hard to leave a job and find another one if it's not achieving your goals, because companies aren't making the commitment to the younger generations that they did to older generations, kind of like, we're your golden parachute. They're kind of like, I don't need to stick around here because the moment you need to cut somebody, I'm out. We just experienced that in the pandemic. Younger generations were saying, I'm in need of food. I'm in need of emotional support. I'm in need of this. Whereas the older generations were like, I'm pretty good right now. I'm surviving this really well. Well, that's because you were able to fire all of those younger people to create a better economic reality that was sustainable through all of this. So there is a generational divide in this. But I do think that the answer to your question of, how do we move this forward is we have to lean into the millennial reality and the millennial vision of the future. And we need to combine some of the wisdom of the older generations that they've gotten through years of experience, along with this new wisdom and understanding of the younger generations, and leverage that to create whatever it is that God is wanting us to become for this present moment in time. It took a long time to get to where I landed, but
no, that's
nature
fantastic.
of Q&A.
No, that's fantastic, because I think what you've helped us see by pulling into the generational piece into this is that this idea of engaging culture from the perspective of a Christian is so multifaceted. It's geographically based. It's where you live. It's the soil that your family plants its feet on. But yet then, like you said, it also has these generational aspects. I'm actually a Gen Xer myself, and I've got right down the hall, I've got 3 Gen Z kids on their laptops doing online school right now, so what is that generation's opportunity for evangelism and outreach into their culture look like compared to, like you said, millennials and Xers and boomers and everybody else? But I might take it in that little pivot moment there for a minute, because I know you are so winsome when it comes to the art of evangelism and reaching out. Mm-hmm. And so, I think churches always have been, rightfully so, wondering, how do we get the young generations? How do we reach out to the rising leaders? How do we create the future of the church? So from a cultural conversation perspective, what do you see with your research and work with Barna? Yes, there's been a ton done on millennials, but like Gen Z, and I'm not asking this just because I have Gen Zers, but what is that next generation coming up? What does Christianity need to do to speak into their dominant culture and create leadership in the kingdom of heaven among them? So,
I'll speak specifically to Gen Z in the U.S. context. So, we're just starting to do some of the early work on Gen Z, right? So they're just getting to a point where they're developmentally, they can reflect in a survey or a poll well enough to have accurate results. So our work is preliminary there, although we've done some really depth stuff. We're actually in the field right now doing a second wave of Gen Z research that we're really excited about, that will continue the work that we've already started. But one of the things that we're noticing about Gen Z is that different is expected. Like, this is normal for them. So they are learning a whole new set of language around difference and how to stay in the room with difference, where older generations of the church or in secular culture too, right? They won't tolerate it. Chuck Todd did an interesting piece of data on Meet the Press last year, where he said, not only are we divided as a country, but we're vacationing in places where, like, Republicans tend to vacation in the same places and Democrats tend to vacation in the same places. So we're really like starting to travel in our bubbles too, in a certain extent. And when you think about this reality that we could, totally like just, misconnect, it's pretty frightening, but Gen Z is definitely growing up natively with different is to be expected. They're the first kindergarten class among, I think it was just, 2017? It was the first kindergarten class in the United States where minorities were the dominant group over Caucasians. Well, that's a huge shift. It is a white guy sharing that. Sometimes people see it as like I'm like throwing some kind of, hey, we're losing our ground, white people. That is not, I think it's a great thing. But sometimes it sounds worse when I say it. But when we look at that, I'm like going, yeah, we are changing. Our demographics are changing. This generation is going to grow up with that as a native reality. They already are. Gender fluidity is much more a nuanced conversation. I mean, I remember when my daughter, who's right at the front end of Gen Z, when she came out to me as a heterosexual, she came in the room one night and she said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I wanted you to know that I'm straight. I'm not gay." And I was like, "Oh, well, thank you. I feel like I know more about you now than I did 5 seconds ago." She went back up to her room, and I looked over at my wife and I go, "Do we need to have a follow-up conversation about that?" And so I went up and talked to her. I said, "Sky, why did you feel the need to tell me that?" And she said, "Well, everybody's trying to figure out who they are. And I've just been trying to figure out, am I straight or gay, or, what am I? And I'm straight." Now, unless you were a sexual minority, you probably never thought much about your gender at that age. You just kind of were what you were. And if you were different, if you were in a minority, you would have said, "Wait a minute, I'm not like everybody else." But not if you were in the dom. So that's changing, right? Now this is another part of identity discovery. So the questions that they're asking are the same questions that generations have asked of young people all over, but there's a different context for them. And some of the boxes that they can check are different. So different is to be expected with Gen Z. And I think that's a really important place. But they're also growing up in a world where there are more non-religious people in the general population. So the rise of the nuns or the agnostics that we've seen over the last 4 years in our culture, that number's gone up. Just about every researcher that's doing research in this space has noted the rise in the nuns. It's pretty dramatic. And so that means that they are growing up in a culture that is less reflective of Christian Judeo-Christian values and virtues and stories and narratives. So that's changing that cultural context a little bit. So that's what Gen Z is going to be bringing, to this table. Very few of them have what we would consider a biblical worldview, and that is just the reality of who they are. They also aren't as impressed with technology. It just is. The millennials actually saw a technology introduce and change life. So it was a novelty. It was something new. But for Gen Z, this is just the way it's always been. They really can't even fathom anything outside of that, So they're also more likely to enjoy analog experiences. So last night, what was I doing in my garage? My daughter's at Parsons School of Design in Manhattan, and she's staying here, and she needed to do a project, and she doesn't have access to the lab during the pandemic. We created a dye lab in our garage. She is hand dyeing fabrics when in an age when she could do that very easily digitally and have the fabric delivered to her in like 48 hours, custom printed with her designs. But there is something about the organic analog experience that she's wanting to get back in touch with. She's been taking special classes with a tailor to learn how to actually do one bespoke piece of clothing for a person. That's not something that's really practiced anymore. So there's this whole just different worldview toward craftsmanship and artisanal things that this generation's coming up with, because technology is great, but it's just one tool of many that they see available, and discovering some of these older ways. So that brings some really interesting questions to the church in terms of tradition and what they may bring back, from the past. When Mercy Me was just starting out, they were working on my garage, and it was very important to them to have a B3 organ as part of their worship experience. And, I was like, one generation takes the organ out of worship and another generation brings it back in. I mean, they would have to disassemble and solder this thing together everywhere we traveled to get it up and running and working again. But it was important to them to have this sound. I was like, don't synthesizers make those same sounds? They're like, it's not the same, And so there's something about these generations. It'll be interesting to see what they bring back into the church as they come to lead it, assuming that they're still there.
Yeah, that's a huge hope and assumption, right? That they're still there. But
yeah.
I have seen that in one of the other hats that I wear is planning and executing worship and liturgies. And it is interesting because you will have older generations ask, well, why are we doing Advent and Lent? And why are we worrying about all these things? And younger generations have their jaws like this.
Yes.
That's why we do it. That's the history. So I think that's so fascinating.
It wasn't created to be boring, right? It became that.
It became that way.
It
but
became
now
rote. It wasn't designed to be that, right? So that's kind of what's cool about the rediscovery of some of these things.
Well, and we had an interesting question pop up. I'm starting to see some chat questions pop up, which I'm grateful for. This kind of goes along these generational lines too, but somebody asked, how to find a balance generationally. It said, justice and mercy versus, kind of younger generations. It says seem to feel like evangelism is demonstrating justice in our faith, but, older generations are more, their evangelism is more share your faith, take somebody to the Billy Graham crusade or whatever it might be. So, can you speak to those differences?
Yeah.
I mean, they're both necessary, but yet, each camp kind of, says, well, this is the way you do it. So I don't know if you want to speak to those differences a little bit.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, almost half of millennial practicing Christians that are millennials feel that it is wrong to share their faith with another person with the expectation that they would convert. So there is a perspective on evangelism that is very different. However, 2/3 of those same millennials would say that being a witness to who Jesus is in the world is important to them. So what we learn is that there's some language things, right, that play in. But we also looked at people who were being evangelized, and we asked them what their experiences were. Things like tracts, concerts, events, not real high on their list for things that they feel comfortable engaging in. However, having conversations that are meaningful are important. And some of the qualities that those who are evangelized said that they're looking for is they're looking for people who can have who can listen without judgment. So that tells you a little bit about how we're being perceived in the culture as Christians. So they enjoy being listened to without judgment, and they enjoy conversations about faith where they don't feel they're being forced into a conclusion. So those are some interesting insights, in terms of all that. I think what concerns me in terms of this idea of separation, though, is that, and this actually the first research project that David and I ever did together, 20 some years ago, was on teens and evangelism. And one of the things that we found is that teenagers weren't exactly sure who in their life wasn't a Christian. And one of the things that we went a little bit deeper in this research project we did for Alpha on reviving evangelism. And what we found is that 2 out of every 5 practicing Christian adults say that they have no friends or family that aren't Christians. Mm-hmm. So that means that we're choosing also in some ways to be separate. That we may be isolated, and the farther that divide happens, when we look at like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, they were students of the Babylonian culture. They understood the context in which they were living in, and sometimes we misread Daniel to be that he was constantly challenging authority. He was challenging the cultural norms. That's not actually what we see. If you really, really look at it through the lens of what he was doing, is he was just trying to trust God in his own, in the areas that were very important to him, but in most other spaces, he had assimilated into the culture and he was performing what it was that he was doing. And it was only at moments when he was asked to compromise. The problem is that we've expanded, I think, our definition of compromise maybe outside the bounds of what compromise, really, really is. And even sometimes when he pushed back, what he did is just said, can I offer a better way, right? And so are we as Christians truly offering a better way? Well, what's interesting in our research at Barna is that non-Christians do not necessarily believe that Christians are living life a better way. So there is a whole kind of apologetic of goodness that we as Christians need to be thinking about. Because we think about how do we prove that we're right and that it's rational and reasonable to believe in Jesus. But what we're not demonstrating is that there is an efficacious goodness that comes out of trusting in Jesus. That it actually makes us, and everything around us better. And so if we are going to evangelize in the future, we have to have that as part of the posture. Now, I'm also not a person who believes that, well, hey, if I just live my life good enough, people will ask me, why, tell me, why are you like the way, but I think that there should be evidence in our life. And I don't know that people see that in the church right now. And in fact, I know they don't see that in the church right now because we have data to back it up over a lot of years. And so we as Christians need to work on that. And I do believe that it's going to be the younger generations that are effective in integrating that. The risk that we have is that if millennials don't feel at home in church, they may not get past some of the wisdom that they need to stay true and faithful to Christ in these changing and challenging times. And therefore they will fall away, or they will sprout up in like the seed sown in rocky soil. So the older generations have to do this. Samantha asked in the chat, she said, I'm resonating with everything you're saying, but how do we execute this? And the reality is, for those that are younger, it's really hard because the people that are older have the power. But I would encourage you to look for the advocates, look for the Gen Xers like myself, like Tracy. Tommy, are you a Gen Xer? I think you're a Gen Xer. And we are the ones that are like the translators between generations. We are the bridge builders. We are, and I'm really realizing my role as an advocate for younger generations. That is, advocacy is one of my most important things in terms of the position that God has put me in. And so you need to look to those people that are in the church right now and lean into them and help them advocate for you. I've really strongly advocated for, we need to have younger people speaking into the imagination of the church. We're not just trying to create a service for them. We're not just trying to create a widget that they'll buy. We need them to be involved in the imagination of it. And that, it means giving away power. And that seems to be the problem.
It often comes down to power, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Which, and you've kind of covered this just in what you just said, but maybe we'll put a fine point on it as it connects to power. There's a question that I've got here around the political discussion. It says, after the, how has the political discussion and the debate in the U.S. affected our ability as Christians to evangelize and share our faith? Which obviously it's negatively impacted it, because I think we're chasing after power and rightness instead of that goodness you spoke of. And the question is, how do we build back a reputation where a Christian is a good word in our culture? Right now, it is a negative word. So is there anything else you want to say to that? I know you've already spoken to that quite a bit, but.
Yeah, what's really interesting is one of the other things we found in our research was that non-believers felt they liked Christians more than they liked Christianity. Okay, so they while they view Christians as being judgmental and some of these other things, there's that wasn't one of the interesting things that we kind of saw, and we kind of defined, and it's really important when we say non-Christians to define what we mean by that. There's lapsed Christians, those who maybe grew up in a Christian tradition and now no longer identify as a Christian. There are, in David and my work, we call them prodigals and nomads. There are religious non-Christians, so people that are spiritual, but they are not Christian in that spirituality, maybe another religious faith, it may be just some kind of generic spirituality. And then there are atheists or agnostics who just kind of deny the supernatural realm, that everything can be seen and experienced. And we're kind of, and those three groups are very different in terms of how they, perceive everything. And so it's really important to kind of know who it is you're talking to. But one of the things that they all seem to say that would maybe convince them to be a Christian is a personal spiritual experience. And so that seems to be something that is true. So what I'm finding with people when they're sharing with me that they're in crisis or whatever, I need to be showing them how to really lean and trust God, and how to experience God. A lot of times when somebody says, I don't know that God exists, the first thing I want to do is go through some apologetics as to, well, here's why you can believe that God exists, or here's some arguments that says it's not unreasonable to believe in God. What I really need to be doing is saying, how do I help them experience and know God? How do I help them really feel the power of God in their life and the presence of God in their life? I don't know that we necessarily think that way when we're doing evangelism. But one of the things that people definitely said they do not dig, tracts. So that was something that was definitely not welcome. I think only about 6 or 7% of those who've been evangelized said they felt positively toward that. So if you're doing it and hey, this is for the 7% that are into it, great. Much better to actually spend time with people that aren't believers. And I think that's the big challenge right now, is that we have a lot of Christians that don't actually know non-Christians. They've separated so much. Ed Stetzer kind of has this little chart that he shows where, the dominant culture and Christianity there used to be very little that divided us in terms of our values and our goals. And now that's separated. And my question is the part that's separating true Christianity or a cultural form of Christianity? And what does it take to live into this gap? And that we maybe see that a little bit differently. I don't know. I haven't read enough of his work on it, but I did see the drawing, and those are the questions that came to mind, because I'm seeing my children trying to navigate their faith in New York City as creatives. It is a struggle to try and figure out how to do that because they don't feel the church is necessarily supportive. It's kind of an all in or all out kind of a thing. How do you live in the middle?
Yeah, that middle is the magic space for sure. And it's interesting to hear you say that because while yes, there is that divide, I've noticed personally,
especially when the middle is seen as compromise.
Exactly. And unfortunately, all indicators are currently that we're going to get more and more entrenched. You know, we have a really vibrant community where I live, and most of the families and friends we interact with are actually not people of faith. They're our friends in our community. And it's interesting, while we may be divided on what we believe about organized religion in the church, everybody's asking the same questions though. They're desperate for answers to the same questions. How do I survive this world we live in? How do I raise my kids? How do I navigate depression, anxiety? So it's interesting if a Christian could provide a sounding board and a space for the questions we're all asking. Is that, an effective tool for evangelism, would you say?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm working with some Christian groups and leaders in the city of Tucson, and they're working on economic development, and they're inviting non-Christian leaders in this space to work around tables with them. And one of their motivations for doing it is they want people to see that Christians have solutions to these problems and that they care about them. And that's probably one of the biggest things they found in this journey, is that people are saying, oh, I wouldn't think you guys would care about eradicating poverty or helping create economic opportunity for people that don't have that. And so it's kind of blowing their mind, but they're being able to lead with goodness. And I think we've lost the art of finding common ground with people in the church. And that's another part of our issue, is we can't find that thing that we agree on together. And I think when we look to, especially, I grew up in California. I moved to the Bible Belt. I travel around all over now. And one of the things that I've noticed is, like, in the Bible Belt, there is cultural power that is being lost right now during this time. But like, if you go up into Oregon or you go up into New England areas, you'll find that they never had it. And there's not enough of them to even, like, it'd be like this. There as the church are finding ways to find common ground in ways that I haven't found the stronger Southern belt of Christianity finding that. There's more of the struggle. So I'm looking to them as some of my models for the future and how we move forward, where they say, hey, we all believe in better education for our kids. We all want our young people to be healthier. Okay, let's start there, and let's find that. Let's start on that place of common ground and then figure out how we move in that space. And it would be interesting to see if the narrative of predominant Christianity in the United States could be branded by some of those areas, as opposed to maybe some of the Southern, the Southeast, kind of Bible Beltish regions. There is an interesting culture tension there, I think, perhaps as well coming.
Yeah, a different brand.
Yeah.
I know that's a loaded word, but
yeah.
Okay, so slight turn here, looking at some of the stuff coming up in the chat. Online church. I mean, here we are, forced into it. What happens after the pandemic? Is this still a thing? Are young generations, is this just what they're going to want to do? Or
yeah, that's a great question. We've done research on this, and what we're finding is that people still want the in-person experience, but they're also very much more open to both. So having options, especially those that have younger families, and they realize that sometimes the challenges schedule-wise of being physically in church and getting there versus being able to participate at home, that having those options might be more valuable. So I think that we are going to see a hybridization of the church in the years to come in terms of how we deliver those experiences. What's been interesting during the pandemic, one of the things that we kind of thought might happen when we were kind of just futuring, was thinking that people would be doing a lot more church hopping. And what we're finding is a lot of people aren't. They are kind of staying dialed into their church community and that stream. Some people, but not a majority, are not even close to a majority, are checking out other churches online, but most people are feeling comfortable staying in their community. So there's something really powerful about that. And what I do think we're going to see, though, is that in David and my research on Faith for Exiles, we found that about 38% of 18 to 29-year-olds who at some point in time in their life confessed Christ or considered themselves to be a Christian, 38% of them are going to church with frequency, but we call them habitual Christians. Faith is not at the center of their life. Their doctrine is not necessarily figured out or solidified. And David and I, we did this research, about a year and a half or so ago, and the book came out in the fall, or 2 years ago, and the book came out in the fall. We had no idea the pandemic was coming, but one of the things that we said is this group could have their hand on the door, and they're just waiting for an excuse to turn it and walk out. Mm-hmm. Based on some of the numbers that we've seen, there is a possibility that this group will walk out during the pandemic, because a lot of people are not attending church online. So they're not, the number of people that have made that shift is just not as strong as a lot of people would like to believe. So there are a lot of people that aren't participating. So that's going to be interesting, because I don't know that we know how the pandemic has changed us yet. Our biological rhythms have changed. Our understanding of connection and how we use technology to do that has changed. Our values have changed about what's really important to us. And I don't know that we're really going to fully understand that until we try to snap back into something normal. I'll tell you just a really weird, it's a little bit gross, but it's okay. But like I've started doing some live events at some places that are gathering again. And one of the things in my biorhythms have changed when I use the bathroom and all that kind of stuff, because I'm at home all the time, been at home for months. And now all of a sudden I'm asked to sit and all that. And I need to go right now. I can't get up and go, like little things like that your body kind of gets on a little bit of a cycle. And then all of a sudden you realize that it's not, or the idea that a lot of times I can multitask when I'm doing something, and I'm in a meeting or whatever, and then I'm in a meeting physically and I can't multitask. I'm going, I don't know if this is an effective use of my time. So I think there's a lot of things that we don't know how we fundamentally changed. I've met more of my neighbors during this pandemic than I ever had before. I've seen more families taking walks. People have been transformed, and this has gone on long enough for new habits and rhythms. So I don't know what that means for church, but I know that people are saying they want physical, and I think we all do. I think there's something like literally something organic that happens in being physically present with people. I love this. This is great. But I think there is something that we don't even understand metaphysically about ourselves that happens when we're in people's presence. We're breathing in their molecules. We're, all these weird things that God made us to be that we don't even understand. So I do think there is something physical about physical presence that's important that isn't going to go away, but it might be really different than what it was.
Well, and here's interesting, because I agree with you 100% on that. Is there something then, we have a question that kind of came up in the chat that, yes, obviously tracts, we're not going to hand out tracts and stuff anymore, but in the new world.
Oh, we will. We will.
Some people may, 7%, right? But is there, once it's safe to do these things again, is there a place then for sort of a door-to-door sort of evangelism, but maybe it's not a handout, a tract? Maybe the example in the chat was, is it a, hi, we're these folks from this church, how can we pray for you? Do you need us to help you with anything? Do you see a return to a situation like that, or maybe not?
Yeah, well, I think, tracts are an efficient way to transmit information. They're not a great experience though, right? And so that was a way to solve a capacity problem. How do we give information to the most number of people? Well, guess what? We have better ways of doing that. In fact, we have more relational ways of doing that using the internet. And one of the things that we know is that people are going online and Googling things before they're going to a real person to talk about them. So when I went to my doctor not long ago, when I came in, he said, "So what do you think you have?" And I go, "Well, that's why I'm here." I go, "That's a really interesting question to ask." He goes, "Well, I know you've Googled all your symptoms and, and you've got some ideas." He goes, "And I actually learn a lot by asking you, what are you learning about this, about what's afflicting you?" He goes, "Because I can't stay up on everything as your doctor." And I thought that was a really interesting thing, because I don't necessarily make that assumption, or I wasn't at the time making that assumption of the teenagers in my youth group. I wasn't coming in going, "What have you been learning about, what have you been exploring?" Because they are Googling, is God real? They are Googling, are there contradictions in the Bible? The question is, does the church show up in those spaces? Are we using SEO to help locate the people that are asking questions and helping connect them to what it is they're looking for? So it may be that the tract is a power dynamic of me thrusting something at you, rather than being a magnet that's pulling people into a conversation that they're wanting to have. And so I think that that there is some real opportunity around digital explorations that are low risk for a person. I'm not having to have a conversation with a person, but I can explore some things on my own. I think churches can be doing a lot of that type of work. I think house churches are going to be something, hey, let's face it, this is one pandemic, but we've just seen, and we know that the global culture is changing. Our world is smaller. We are less vulnerable. I mean, we are more vulnerable than we realized. I think we've all realized how fragile we are, how quickly economies can be crushed by something like this. We will have more pandemics, we will have other things, and the church is going to have to figure out how to be more resilient in the face of them. And so I do expect seeing more home churches, neighborhood churches, community churches that give people access and easier entry points into conversations and relationships of faith.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that tips into another question that's here in the chat, and I'm going to add a few little elements of that of this question. But so when you say house church, do you think that these are going to be more like home small groups connected to kind of a mothership or a central place, or do you think this is going to be, and not that one is right or wrong, I'm just curious, just a group of people who've said, we're just going to do this Jesus thing in our living room, and we're not connected to the resources that are coming from XYZ church, or we're just going to Google and find some sheets. And then in that situation, and this is a big question too, but then, what is the role then of professional ministry leaders? We have a call full of them right now. And if everybody just wakes up one morning and decides to have people over and do church without connection to anything else, we're all out of work.
Right.
Which is, I say that tongue in cheek, but, what is the future of that sort of interaction, and how will people do home church?
Yeah, I think it's D, all of the above. I think we're going to see a lot. I mean, the bottom line is it takes a lot of work to do something well. And so people are always going to have a need to be resourced and to be able to have these things curated. And so it really is going to come down to their individual interest in how they do that and express that. But I do think that we have to help people really understand what church is as a structure and a form. There's so many operating definitions of church. It just means, well, once I put my trust in Christ, I am a part of the church. Yes, you are. You have been grafted into the body, and you are a part of the bride of Christ. But there's also a local expression of the church. We know that the church will not fail, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So we can have a lot of confidence in the church. People are always saying, is the church dead or whatever? And I'm like, the church, it can't be. I mean, Christ promised that nothing was going to prevail against it. But the institutions of church, the local building, a legal entity, that can fail. That can go away. So I think we're going to see some metamorphosis around that quite a bit as as we move into the future, and some of that's going to be a situation of economics, sustainability, things of that nature. But I think organized church is still here to stay. It's just going to take some different, perspectives, because people still are looking for leadership. People are still looking for someone to really pour into the scriptures and say, with some sense, authoritatively, this is what we believe the Word of God is telling us, and providing that orthodoxy.
Yeah, and then possibly somebody just asked in the chat then too, leading us to a place where you might have more bivocational, pastors or ministry leaders, and less these vocational.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're already seeing that happen quite a bit. A lot of bivocationality, but I would say, we have to realize that the only way that church is going to go away is if we let it become something it wasn't meant to be. So that's really on us as ministers of the gospel, and those of us who are leaders, is if we're making church a conference that just doesn't travel or that happens every Sunday, then we are not really being the church. And I think, what's really been interesting is on and if you on when we started going digital, I asked on my Facebook page, what didn't you get today that you normally get at church? There was a range of responses from, I actually got everything I needed, because church for them is a sermon. And so as long as they can check the box that they did what the church said was church, their conscience is clear for the week. So you have that. Then you had other people say, I don't know, but something was missing, fellowship. But what was interesting is nobody had a great answer. But they knew they weren't completely getting what church was, except for those that thought the sermon was all they needed to do, or that it was just an activity that they needed a task to check off for Sunday. And so looking at that, I realized everybody's going, how do we do church online? I'm like, how do we do church in person? Because I'm not sure we're doing that really well right now based on what we're seeing. And the easiest things to translate into virtual space was the sermon and the music. Yet people will tell you there's something more that they're going for than that. That's actually maybe the least important parts of why they're attending. We're not even trying to provide that during this time. Most churches are not providing much more than a Sunday experience virtually, and the connections are very much a sit and stream experience. They're not be with and become type of experiences. Those can be achieved virtually. We're not providing those so much as a church right now during this time. There's very little interactivity.
No, absolutely. We have about 12 minutes left. About 5 of those minutes I'm going to give to our good colleague here, Tommy, because he's going to have a few notes at the end. So that leaves us with just a few minutes left with you, Mark. And I wondered if, kind of just in the last 5 minutes we've got with you here, is there any, we've covered a ton of topics today, and we're so grateful for your time and your wisdom and your insight. Is there any final encouragement or note that you want to offer? Here we've got this group of folks that are saying, okay, I'm a Christian, and there's this big word, culture. What do we do to honor God and glorify his kingdom in this time? So I don't know, just give you the last couple minutes if there's anything you want to share. A fine point.
Yeah, I would say that even still right now, I see so much opportunity for the gospel right now. And so there is, I think what the bubble that's burst is maybe one of action without results. And we're now looking more hard at results. It's kind of like when, advertising used to be, how many magazines or commercials did you put out there? But you couldn't actually, but then all of a sudden the digital came, and it was like, we can actually measure how many people clicked. We can actually measure how many people viewed this ad and for how long did they watch the video. The metrics have become better. And the same thing is true in the church experience. And so we're dealing with reality in a way that we never maybe have had to. But I just see that and I especially see with younger people, a desire to express their faith, and they don't know where to belong. And so they're looking for that place to really belong and to be the church. And I think there's just huge opportunity to continue to be that for people. And for me, I'm just on this commitment of this apologetic of good. I believe that Christianity is true, but rarely are people asking me about that. They want to know, is Christianity good? And I don't know that that's the way that it's being perceived right now. And I think that we have a huge opportunity to show that this is the gospel. This is good news. And I think we have to, that's a frame shift that we have to have around that. And I'd also say that, I think that there are going to be some changes in vocational ministry. And I think we, as those of us that are vocational ministers, that are going to be pastors, they're going to serve in that capacity, we need to be looking for ways to help our congregants live out their faith in their vocation. That's one of the 5 things that David and I found in our Faith for Exiles research, was that vocational discipleship was a contributing factor to resilient discipleship, was the integration of faith. And for a lot of ministers for years, we've said, if you really love God, write a check from the money that you're making, or become a missionary or a minister. But there's never been a, how do I be in the medical profession? How do I be in the service profession? How do I be in the food and beverage industry, and that be an extension of glorifying God? Whether you eat, whether you drink, whatever you do it all to the glory of God. And I think that ministers, we've been a little short-sighted in that, because the economic engine has gotten us into this mode of, you make money out there in the world to give it to the church so we can do good, rather than saying, how do we help you do good in the places that you are most of the time in the week? And how do we help you really leverage and live into that? That is going to be what gives us longevity. Because right now, most people, when they have career troubles or questions, they don't think to go to their pastor for advice, only if they think there's a benevolence fund that might help them during a period of unemployment. But they're not looking for career advice. We have to become better educated in terms of how the rest of our congregants are working and making a living, and what their careers and vocations are, and figure out how they can use those platforms of influence to change the world and the communities around them. Because that's what where I'm seeing a lot of the impact being made, as the church has kind of a negative, influence factor.
Well, Mark, I wish we were all together and we could just give you a resounding amen and all that good stuff. It has been encouraging to share with you. It has been, this time with you, it's been insightful. It's been challenging. It's been all of the things. So thank you, Mark, for just the time and the opportunity. I've had a couple people say, one guy just said, I got to go. It's past 10 p.m. He was logging in from Kenya. So we did have somebody global with us, which was awesome. So anyway, I've just
been producing events in the middle of the night across Africa this week. So I understand his time zone pain. Today was the first night of sleep I've gotten. So
yeah, well, I'm glad you got to sleep a little bit. So if you would allow me just like a quick, couple seconds to just pray for you and the ministry that you do. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tommy to just take us home these last 5 minutes here. But Lord, thank you so much for Mark, for the ministry of Barna. Thank you for David Kinnaman and the great mind that he brings to bear fruit in your kingdom, Lord. We remember him right now, and the grief that he is working through, and that will be a very present experience for him for a long time. So Lord, we pray over him right now too. God, thank you for the participants on this call, whether ministry leaders or seminary students or just curious onlookers, Lord, or all of the above. We're grateful that you brought them here to this conversation. And we just pray now that you would bless us with the ability to see others the way you see them, to engage with the world around us the way you would want us to, and to build together a kingdom culture that ultimately honors and glorifies you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, Tommy, it's all yours.
Thanks. It's great to be with you all today.
Thanks. And Mark, I would say this, and also Tracy, is I built cell towers for about 12 years. And so that was what I did vocationally. And then from that point, I went to seminary and I was a pastor. And Tracy, Mark, I did that for probably about 3 years. And I started asking myself after the third run of doing the same thing, it felt like a routine. Is this it? Is this something I'm designed to do for, or is there more to do it? And so then from that point, I got hired to a Bible seminary or Bible college in Chicago. And then I'm saying, okay, is this it where it is? But then a lot of times dealing with higher ed education, it was a little slow for me. Okay, that can't be it. And so guys, now I find myself doing 5 different organizations that I run. I work on the Growth Center. I started a business in Jakarta, Indonesia. I run a ministry called Resource Global. I also started do something with Together LA as their managing director. So I have 5 different companies under my hat. And I realized I like doing that in my own way. I'm not a vocational pastor, but I'm able to grow the gospel through my integration of my faith and my work by being creative and by being an entrepreneur. And so even with the Growth Center guys, it really led me on this journey. I read an article where it says that the Teslas, the Netflix, the Googles, and Microsoft no longer require a 4-year undergrad. And so, well, does that change the role of how we educate pastors? And so that is the conversation that here at the Growth Center we're trying to teach. Not only are you being taught and led by professors, but are you hearing from ministry practitioners such as Mark, such as David, such as Andy, such as Tracy? Are you hearing from pastors such as Tracy? But are you also hearing from marketplace leaders? Like we recently had Tony Bancroft on there. Well, he's the chief animator for Space Jam 2. Before that, he was a director of Mulan. How do we begin to learn from different individuals, from different cultures, to really be able to continue to grow us as a pastor? And so, guys, I don't know where we're going, but I hope and pray that as we continue this journey over at the Growth Center, that we're going to look at creative ways to train the modern day ministry leader, which is more entrepreneurial. And so as a result, we're trying to create this ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ministry leader ecosystem. How do we continue to really bond and learn from each other and have those conversations as well too? So Mark, Tracy, thank you very much for the conversation. And any last words, Tracy, as we wrap up?
No, just I echo everything that's been said. Thank you all again for spending an hour and a half with us on a Friday, and just prayers for a peace-filled Advent season and end to 2020, and that God brings us all health and some semblance of whatever normal used to be or will be again in 2021. So thanks, everybody. It's good to be with you all.
Merry Christmas, and we'll talk soon.